hundreds of thousands or millions of readers. It seems irrational. And it was very difficult for the government lawyer to justify. Similarly, the Bureau of Prisons permitted television and radio interviews of prisoners, and as Judge Fernandez pointed out, nothing would prohibit the television reporter from arriving on the scene, start filming an interview with Dannie Martin, and Dannie Martin starts reading his latest piece on the Gulag mentality and so on. Letters to the editor were permitted, even signed letters to the editors were permitted, even if they did it every week, but no bottling was allowed. And these restrictions seemed pretty silly. The government lawyer's only excuse, repeated several times during the argument, is we had to draw a line someplace. And where they drew it was on the wrong side of the First Amendment in my submission, but the court, as it routinely does, took the case under submission and said that it would be decided in due course. As I say in the book, I was particularly invested in the issues in Danny's case because I did the first prisoner's rights case actually ever argued in the Supreme Court, certainly the first First Amendment case. That was Procunier versus Martinez, which was a class action on behalf of all California prisoners that attacked the California Department of Corrections rules on prisoner correspondence. The rules were blatantly content-based. They made it a disciplinary offense for prisoners in their letters to their family to unduly complain, to magnify grievances, to express inflammatory political, racial, religious, or other views or beliefs, or say anything defamatory or otherwise inappropriate. And they had a form that the censoring guards, all the correspondence was censored, of course, they had a little checklist form that they used, and it had blanks in it, and the guards were free to put in blanks if none of these other restrictions applied. Well, the restrictions were clearly content-based. Does that trigger strict scrutiny? Not in the prison context, not with regard to prisoner expression. And until the Martinez case in the Supreme Court, most courts, both state and federal, had taken what they called the hands-off approach to prisoners' rights cases. Not just First Amendment cases, but the whole range of prisoner complaints about prison practices, policies, and conditions. That is, the courts say, we will defer. Courts are not expert in prison administration. We will defer to the expertise and the expert judgment of the prison administrators whose obligation is to maintain prison security. We won't interfere with that judgment. We will take a hands-off view of prisoners' rights. But sometimes, as in the Martinez case, and starting with the Black Muslim cases in the late 60s, which were First Amendment cases, I mentioned this before, where the Black Muslim prisoners were frightening to the prison administrators, and they didn't permit them to exercise their religion. They invoked the religious freedom of worship clause of the First Amendment, and their claims got some traction in the courts, and sort of cracked open the door to the hands-off doctrine. And then Martinez comes along, which involved restrictions that were so arbitrary and so irrational that the courts couldn't stay their hand. I put in the book some of the dialogue between at the argument of Martinez between the Deputy Attorney General for California, who was a very distinguished Australian man with an elegant accent and so on, who was trying to tell the court that prisoners don't have any First Amendment rights. And the theory that the case used for that proposition was that the First Amendment is rooted in the notion of promoting a marketplace of ideas among a free people, and the promotion of democratic values and the importance of having a marketplace of ideas among a free people. And these people are not free. They have disabled themselves from exercising First Amendment rights. The underpinning of the First Amendment is that notion, and they have selected themselves out of a free society. And that really offended Thurgood Marshall, who jumped all over Eric Collins and attacked the notion that by the commission of the crime, somebody is ousted of all of their constitutional rights. Other justices besides Marshall were much more skeptical about declaring that prisoners had First Amendment rights, and they were fearful that we were asking the court to open the door to the whole panoply, the whole range of First Amendment rights that prisoners could enjoy. Harry Blackman asked, well, don't prison officials have the right to read prisoner mail going out, presumably to discover escape plots or drug smuggling operations and so on, and asked about the other First Amendment rights we were seeking. And once again, I had to scale that down, that we weren't asking for a full range of rights, but certainly a right to criticize prison policy, for example, an echo of all these wonderful cases like Stromberg that established that we Americans do have the right to criticize government and government officials. And the decision in the Martinez case was written by Justice Lewis Powell, who was a fairly new Nixon appointee, Republican, to the court. And he decided the case based on a theory that I hadn't argued, which is, look, what's going on here? This is correspondence to people on the outside of the prison. This is expression that's going to moms and sisters and family members who are on an approved visiting list from the prison. And those people haven't committed any crimes. Those people haven't forfeited any First Amendment rights. And they have a right to receive information in the marketplace of ideas, including ideas that come from prison. And what really seemed to move Justice Powell was that the California rules, he says, they fairly invited prison officials to apply their own personal prejudices and opinions as standards for prisoner mail censorship. Not surprisingly, they used this latitude for discretion to suppress unwelcome criticism. I think that's what really moved the court to strike down the rules. And the court ruled unanimously, 9-0, that the California correspondence rules violated the First Amendment. I think emphasizing the right that we all have to criticize government, despite the fact that the critics, in this case, were the disfavored minority prisoners. Justice Marshall, joined by Justices Brennan and Douglas, First Amendment Lyons wrote separately to say that the prison official shouldn't even be allowed to read prisoner correspondence because that's intimidating. The right of free expression is not a privilege. It's a constitutionally guaranteed right. And a prisoner's free and open expression will surely be restrained by knowing that every word he writes can be censored. That was based on the right of prisoners to express themselves, not the right of outsiders to hear what prisoners had to say. But that commanded only 3 justices' votes, not the majority of the court. That was Martinez. After the argument in Dannie Martin's case, and it had gone pretty well, I thought I was hopeful that the court, the Ninth Circuit Court, would follow the lead of Martinez and throw out the Federal Bureau of Prisons rules, and the Bureau must have figured out pretty much the same thing. And before any decision came down, they released Dannie on parole, released him from prison before anything could be decided. So he was free in the sense that he was out of prison, and then the Bureau's lawyers asked the court to dismiss the appeal as moot, because Dannie was no longer a prisoner, the prison rules didn't apply to him anymore, the court doesn't have to decide anything. We opposed that request, saying, well, you know, he can, as a parolee, he can be jerked back into prison for a whole lot of reasons. But the court decided that they didn't have to decide, that they didn't want to get into deciding these difficult issues, and they dismissed the appeal and the case as moot. All of the work that had gone into trying the case, getting together the appeal and so on, came to nothing at all. Yeah. He wasn't subject to the rules anymore. He was outside. Well, it would apply to other prisoners. But Dannie's case was not a class action. It was an individual, Dannie Martin, against the prison officials. It wasn't a class action. So the court ducked the issue. And it was an unhappy ending to the case. Dannie did continue to write. He wrote, Peter Sussman got together all of the pieces that Dannie had written and compiled them into this one volume called Committing Journalism, which is what Dannie said. I committed bank robbery and they put me in prison, and that was right. Then I committed journalism and they put me in the hole, and that was wrong. It's a really good read. He's a gifted writer. And so they published that book. He was back in prison on parole when the book came out, but he got some notoriety as a result of the book, and he showed up at celebrity events with Paul Newman and other people, and as a parolee, he's still around. He lives in Montgomery, Alabama now, but his unique voice as interpreting what the prisons are really like for the people who would never know was lost, and the Bureau of Prisons got away with it. The standard for prison officials justifying restrictions on First Amendment rights has changed from Martinez to now. Martinez was very unclear about what the standard was, partly because the theory of the decision was that we're dealing here with the rights of outsiders rather than prisoners. I think it would be fair to say that the standard was, is the restriction necessary to prison security? And that was the standard that prevailed for a decade or so. And then the court decided another case called Turner, no relation, had nothing to do with me, Turner versus Safely, which considerably eased the standard that prison officials had to meet from, is this necessary for prison security, to, is there a logical connection between the restriction and prison security? And all prison officials have to do is articulate some logical connection. They don't necessarily have to have any evidence that if a prisoner does this, prison security will be impaired. They just have to articulate a theory for how this relates to prison security, which greatly diminishes the scope of constitutional rights, not just First Amendment rights, but all rights that prisoners would seek to enjoy. So Martinez's case is sort of a diluted authority. I think it would still apply in the case of censorship of prisoner correspondence, but probably not much beyond that. Questions about any of this? Expressions of outrage? They didn't respond. They simply said case dismissed. They said that he's on parole and the rules do not apply. Case dismissed. Gene?
So it kind of seems like prisoners are in this no man's land right now. We try to protect them. And wouldn't this case have formally activated the time-place and manner test? It wasn't a contact evasion, and that they would have to prove that the restriction met in a real way met the sentencing and protecting. Does that all have to be thrown out with this?
Comes to prisoners, yeah. They do not use either the strict scrutiny analysis or the time, place, and manner. I mean, if it were place is in prison, well, then you could look at the 3 time, place, and manner factors, but the courts don't use that. All they use is the Turner versus Safely logical connection analysis, which is very easy on government officials and results in prisoners, because of their status as prisoners, having reduced First Amendment rights. Okay, see you next Tuesday.